Good day, fish tankers. Hair algae. It's not harmful, but it's unsightly, and wouldn't it be nice to have a cleanup crew to help you remove them? And not to even mention the dreaded black beard algae, and there's very little critters that eat it. But there are two algae eaters, or fish that are marketed as algae eaters, that are very similar looking in the trade, that are often bought to help these kind of problems. Now, although they're similar looking, they're very different. And this one is an absolute menace. You should never buy this fish. Whereas this one is actually quite cool and will devour that black beard algae. Although it does have a few drawbacks that you should be aware of before buying one. Want to find out more? Stick around. Now this fish here, sitting on the snail shell, is a Chinese algae eater. Now these fish will eat some algae when they're young and when they're small, but pretty soon they grow a bit bigger and then they become an absolute menace. Like you can see that one there. They're fine now, but once they're bigger, they'll start becoming aggressive, attack all your other fish, and even worse, they suck onto their sides and rasp the body slime off their sides, eventually killing and injuring a lot of fish. So never buy these. Now in this tank we can see there's some Chinese algae eaters mixed in with Siamese algae eaters. Now the one there by the rock eating at the food on the bottom is a Chinese algae eater. Now look at the dark stripe running down the length of its body. You can see the outline is not as clear as the other fish around it that are Siamese algae eaters. There you see it again. It's sort of mottled on the edging of that long line running down the length of its body. And the other telltale sign is, if you look at its mouth, it's got a proper sucker mouth, somewhat like a plecostomus or a pleco, somewhat the same thing. Now these fish down here are Siamese algae eaters. You can see the black line is much better defined. So yeah, if you look closely, you'll see the difference. A darker black line, it's not mottled on the edges, it's better defined. And there's the Chinese algae eater again on top of the rock. So that's the difference between the two. And here's a Chinese algae eater in a nice golden color, but even though it's a pretty fish, just leave it alone. It's just not worth it. If you have to keep it with tough, robust fish that'll just knock it back or shove it off its sides. Guys, if you find the content useful, remember to hit that like button. So that covers the Chinese algae eater. Just stay away from that fish. And here we're back to the Siamese algae eater. You can see here there are tiny little fish here, and lots of people put them in nano tanks, but they do have some drawbacks. Number one is they grow quite big. They can become about all of 15 centimeters or just a bit over that. And among each other, they're quite scrappy. They leave other fish species alone, but as you can see here, they establish a hierarchy between each other. If it's a big tank with a lot of plants like this tank, and they can get away from each other, it never really develops into anything serious. But in smaller tanks, it can become a problem. So here's one of my second biggest tank, and the two Siamese algae eaters there always fought, and it wasn't quite as big. So I took one out and I put him in here in a big tank with the two bigger tank mates. And now that they are free, it works out better. But I still won't say it's an ideal situation. They are shoaling fish, so I would keep, if its tank is bigger, 3 or more. And if it is just a normal size 200 liter tank, which I say is a minimum size of them, I would just keep a single one. You can see the single one now is quite happy on its own. So this is a Chinese algae eater. Never buy this one. And this is the Siamese algae eater. Quite okay as long as you have a large enough tank. Guys, please remember to subscribe. And until I see you again, take good care of those domestic denizens of the deep.